I'm Claire Donovan, 31 years old, and the night I saw my father's fist tighten around a glass of whiskey, I knew I was about to face something I had been avoiding for years. The dining table gleamed under the chandelier set with polished silver and plates we only touched at Christmas, yet the air was already heavy with expectation. My sister's smile was stretched too tight, my mother's hands busied themselves over nothing, and I felt the invisible weight pressing down on me from every side. By the time my father slid the envelope across the table, I already sensed it wasn't an invitation, it was a command. I remember the way the edge of that folder caught the light, like the first glint of a blade, and I knew that opening it would mean stepping into a fight I couldn't win. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you've ever been asked to carry a burden that was never yours to carry. I grew up in a modest neighborhood in Ohio, in a home where my mother insisted that kindness mattered more than possessions, and where my father often reminded us that hard work would always keep a family strong. For most of my childhood, I believed him. My sister Megan and I shared a bedroom lined with old floral wallpaper, and though we argued like sisters do, I thought family was something solid, something safe. But as we grew older, the seams began to show. My father grew harsher, my mother quieter, and Megan learned quickly how to bend their moods in her favor. By the time I left for college, I had built my own path in finance, one that gave me stability and a sense of control. Megan chose design work full of creativity, but never quite steady, and my parents treated our differences less like choices and more like proof of who had been responsible and who had not. Whenever Megan stumbled, I was expected to steady her. Whenever bills piled up, I was asked to contribute. And whenever Megan wanted something, my parents framed it as the family's need, never just hers. So when Megan called one evening, her voice sweet and warm, inviting me to what she called a cozy family dinner, a part of me already braced for what might follow. I told myself it was just another meal, a chance to sit around the table like we used to. Still, I felt the tension in my shoulders as I parked in their driveway, saw the windows glowing against the winter sky, and smelled roasted chicken mixed with lemon cleaner as I stepped inside. My father sat at the head of the table, broad-shouldered even in his 60s, with that same unreadable stare I had known all my life. Megan greeted me with an embrace that felt more like possession than affection, and my mother fluttered around us, determined to make everything appear perfect. The clink of silverware and small talk filled the room. At first, Megan's decorating projects, Brian's latest attempt at business, but I waited for the real reason I was there. And when the envelope finally slid across the table, I knew this was not about chicken or family. It was about obligation, about what they believed I owed them. I stared at the thick paper resting in front of me, and my father's voice was low but firm when he told me to open it. My hand hesitated, the weight of years of unspoken duty holding it back. Whatever was inside, I already understood it would not be a request, but the beginning of a demand I could not easily escape. That envelope sat between us heavy and silent, while the candles on the table flickered as if they sensed the air changing. My father didn't raise his voice, but his tone left no room for argument when he told me to sign. I slipped my hand over the folder, pulling it closer, and flipped it open. A stack of papers stared back at me, full of numbers and terms I recognized immediately. Adjustable rates, penalties clauses that spelled disaster if Megan and Brian ever missed a payment. I looked up, and Megan leaned forward, her chin lifted like she was daring me to question it. "You've been in finance long enough," my father said, resting his glass down. "You know what this means. Just add your name, and it's done." His words felt like they'd been rehearsed. My mother smoothed the tablecloth, her eyes never meeting mine, and Brian gave a confident smile that didn't reach his eyes. I turned a page, keeping my voice steady. "You've been denied already, haven't you?" The pause told me enough. Megan's lips tightened into a smile that carried no warmth. "It's just a paperwork issue," she said, brushing it off like it was nothing. "Freelance income doesn't always look great to banks. This is temporary." My father leaned back, crossing his arms. "That's why we need you. You've always been reliable. You've never let the family down." He said it like reliability was a flaw he could exploit. My stomach tightened, but I placed the papers back on the table. "I'll need to think about it," I said. Megan's hand brushed against mine, her voice smooth, coaxing. "It's not that complicated, Claire. You've always helped before. You think we'd ever let you take the fall? We're family." That word lingered in the air, heavy and sharp, like it could bind me to them, whether I agreed or not. I forced myself to smile and nodded once, careful not to reveal the storm inside me. The envelope stayed in the middle of the table untouched. When the plates were cleared, I left with it still sitting there, but the message had been delivered. I was expected to sign. The next morning, I sat at Karen's kitchen table, my hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. The winter sunlight poured across her counter, lighting up the steam curling from her cup. She leaned on her elbows, watching me closely, waiting for me to say what I hadn't yet spoken aloud. "They want me to co-sign," I said finally. My voice came out softer than I meant it to. "Just until the closing goes through. That's what they keep saying." Karen shook her head, her eyes narrowing. "Claire, no. That's not a little thing. That's your name tied to every cent they owe. And you know as well as I do they'll miss payments. It won't be if, it'll be when." I tried to laugh it off, but it fell flat. "It's just, they made it sound so small, like it wouldn't really touch me." "Of course they did," Karen said, leaning closer. "Because they know you'll listen. You've always been the one who cleans things up. That's why they come to you. They're counting on you feeling guilty if you say no." Her words sank in like stones. I wanted to argue, but memories rose uninvited. The credit card charges that weren't mine, the time Brian's failed business pulled from my account, because it was linked the quiet way I had paid it back just to keep my parents from knowing. I pressed my lips together, looking away. Karen's voice softened. "You've lost enough already by letting them use you. Ask yourself what you'll lose if you keep going like this." The clock ticked in the silence between us. She reached across the table, her hand resting gently over mine. "You have to draw the line somewhere. If you don't, they'll never stop. And you know that." I nodded slowly, but the words still caught in my throat. She was right, and I hated that she was right. When I left her house, the sharp, cold air stung my cheeks, and the scent of coffee lingered on my sweater, a reminder of her warning. 2 nights later, I found myself back at my parents' dining table. It was set as though for a celebration, the silver gleaming and the roast glistening in the middle, every detail carefully arranged. Megan and Brian were already seated, wearing smiles that were too smooth, too certain. My father sat at the head, his knife and fork resting neatly on his plate, watching me as if the evening were already decided. Right on time, my mother said, brushing invisible lint from my shoulder as I sat. Conversation flowed, but only just. Megan talked about swatches of fabric she was considering. Brian spoke about an upcoming deal he was confident would bring in money, and my mother described her church committee as though I hadn't heard it before. Beneath it all, the tension wound tighter with each passing minute. When the plates were half cleared, my father set down his glass. "Megan tells me you haven't signed yet." I kept my tone even. "I'm still thinking about it." Brian chuckled, lightly shaking his head. "Thinking, Claire, it's just a signature. You don't even have kids or anyone else to support. Why not help your sister start her life?" The words landed heavier than he intended, his casual tone sharpening against the quiet. My mother nodded as though it were simple. "Families help each other. she said softly, her smile unwavering. I breathed in slowly, steadying myself. It's a big decision. I just want to be careful. My father's smile thinned. Careful or selfish? Megan laughed, quietly, shaking her head. You always make things harder than they need to be. The clatter of silverware filled the silence that followed. My hands clenched in my lap, and for a moment I stared at the tablecloth, tracing the lace patterns, holding my composure. My father's voice dropped low and measured. You've always thought you were better than the rest of us, sitting in your office thinking you see every angle. But life isn't a balance sheet. I lifted my eyes, keeping my tone even. I don't think I'm better. I just know what happens when things go wrong. He said nothing more, but the weight of his stare followed me as I stood to leave. I slipped my coat from the chair, the fabric brushing against my hands, as if urging me to move faster. You'll come by later this week, my father said, his voice calm but unyielding. We'll settle this. It wasn't a question. It wasn't even a request, and though everything in me screamed not to, I found myself nodding. The phone call came late Friday afternoon. My father's voice carried no greeting, no hint of courtesy. Swing by the house after work. We need to finish this. The words left no space for refusal. My hand tightened around the receiver, and though every part of me wanted to say no, the response slipped out before I could stop it. All right. By the time I pulled into their driveway, the last of the daylight had faded. The garage door was raised just enough for me to duck under, and the air inside smelled sharply of oil and cold steel. My father stood near his workbench, a half-empty glass of whiskey, balanced at the edge. Megan leaned against the doorway leading into the house, arms crossed, her expression caught between impatience and satisfaction. "Sit down," my father said, nodding toward the worn stool across from him. His voice was calm, but there was an edge beneath it. I stayed standing. "You wanted to talk," I answered, my breath already catching in the chilled air. He set the glass down, the sound echoing in the concrete room. "This is ridiculous. You're dragging this out, making your sister's life harder over nothing. It's one signature, Claire. That's all." I kept my voice steady. "It isn't nothing. You're asking me to put myself at risk for something I had no part in." Megan let out a quiet laugh, her tone almost playful. "You're being dramatic. It's just paperwork. You're acting like they're trying to ruin you." My father's boots struck the floor as he took a step closer. "I'm your father. I've given you everything. The least you can do is step up when I ask." I shifted back until the wall brushed my shoulder. "I'm not saying no to hurt you," I said carefully. "I'm saying no because it could destroy me." His face hardened. "Destroy you? What destroys a family is a daughter who turns her back when she's needed." The air seemed to close in around me. His voice lowered, dropping into the tone I had known too well growing up, the tone that left no room for escape. "You think you're too good for us. You sit in that office of yours, looking down on the people who made you. That's not what this is." I started, but before I could finish, he moved. The shove sent me hard into the wall, pain shooting through my shoulder, white and sharp. My breath left me in a rush. "Dad, stop." The punch came before I could even lift my hands. A crack across my cheek sent the taste of iron flooding my mouth. I fell to my knees, the concrete unforgiving beneath me, my hand slipping against something wet, blood, I realized, spreading across the floor. Megan stayed where she was, arms folded, her head tilted, like she was observing something she had already predicted. Her voice was almost gentle. "You should have signed the papers." Her words cut more deeply than the blow had. I tried to push myself up, but my shoulders screamed the pain radiating so fiercely it blurred my vision. My father stood over me, his chest rising and falling with each breath. "You'll regret this," he said. I met his eyes, though my body trembled. "I already do. For a moment I thought his fist would rise again. Instead, he turned sharply, brushing past Megan as though I were nothing at all. The door to the house opened and closed, leaving me with the echo of the lock clicking into place. The garage was suddenly silent. My cheek pressed to the cold floor. Each inhale ragged my heart, pounding so loudly it filled my ears. I don't know how long I stayed like that, the smell of oil and iron mixing, until I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. Finally, I forced myself forward, inch by inch, dragging my useless arm. The winter air struck my skin as I crawled out of the garage, snowflakes drifting onto my hair, melting against my hot face. Across the yard, through brittle grass, I made it to the porch steps. My hands shook as I pounded against the door. "Mom, it's me," I gasped. "Please, I need help." Inside, voices murmured low and deliberate. My father's, my mother's. Then silence. "Please, Mom." My forehead pressed against the wood, my tears mixing with blood. "I just need you to open the door." The voices stopped completely. No footsteps, no latch turning, nothing. I tried again, my fists weaker this time. "Don't leave me out here." The only answer was the stillness. My legs gave out and I sank against the welcome mat, the one embroidered with the words, "Family First." Red spots bloomed across the cheerful script. Somewhere in the distance a dog barked and the sound of the wind moved through bare branches overhead. Snow drifted steadily, gathering on my hair, clinging to my clothes. My breaths came shallow, each one more painful than the last. The world around me dimmed, and I let my eyes fall closed. That was how Mrs. Whitfield found me crumpled on the porch, bleeding and half-conscious. Her voice broke through the haze, sharp and urgent. "Oh, my Lord, Claire, what happened to you?" Her hands were already fumbling for her phone. "Stay with me, I'm calling 911. The last sound I remember before the darkness closed in was not the door opening, but the slam of it locking tighter behind me. The red and blue lights bounced off the snow, washing the house in cold flashes as paramedics rushed toward me. Their voices were steady but urgent, guiding me through each careful movement as they lifted me from the porch. A blanket wrapped around my shoulders, shielding me from the sting of the wind, though my body trembled more from pain than cold. As they slid me onto the stretcher, I glanced toward the house. The curtains were drawn, the doorway closed. Not once did it open. Inside the ambulance, one of the EMTs pressed gently against my shoulder, his gloved hand firm but cautious. "Looks dislocated," he said to his partner. "We'll stabilize it until the doctor can set it." The siren wailed to life, carrying us through streets lined with frost. I lay back, staring at the ceiling lights that flickered with every bump in the road, and felt the weight of each breath pressing against my chest. At the hospital, the bright overhead lamps stung my eyes as they examined me. A doctor leaned over, his voice calm but certain. "We'll reset your shoulder and check for fractures. You'll need stitches for your lip." I nodded faintly, letting them work. My mind replaying the sound of the garage door shutting and the echo of my father's footsteps walking away. The antiseptic smell filled my senses, sterile and sharp, and for the first time that night I realized how completely I was alone. By the time morning came, my shoulder was set and my lip stitched. They released me with papers detailing my injuries, words like blunt force trauma and consistent with assault typed neatly across the page. My phone buzzed before I even left the hospital. Dozens of missed calls and messages filled the screen, none from my father, none from my mother. Every single one was from Megan. I hesitated, then answered Karen's call when her name flashed across the screen. Her voice was clipped, controlled, like she was bracing herself. "Claire, before you see it on your own, I need to show you something." A link appeared in my messages. With shaking hands, I opened it. It was Megan's private post. though private meant little once shared. The video played grainy and cropped, showing me on the garage floor, blood streaking my face. The caption scrolled across in soft blue letters. "Please keep my sister in your prayers. She's been struggling and had an episode last night. We did everything we could to calm her down." I froze. The sound of my own ragged breathing filled the quiet hospital room. An episode? That was her story. I called Karen, my voice breaking. "She's making me look unstable, like I did this to myself." "She's controlling the story," Karen said firmly. "And you're letting her if you don't fight back. What do I even do?" "Go online and argue with her. That'll just prove her point." "No," Karen replied. "You gather proof. This isn't family drama anymore. It's assault. And now it's defamation. You press charges." Her words left me silent. The thought of walking into a courtroom against my own father and sister felt impossible. But then I remembered the blanket the EMT had draped over me the way strangers had cared for me when my own family shut their door. My pulse quickened with something I hadn't felt before, not fear, but resolve. That evening I sat at my kitchen table laptop, opened the cursor blinking against a blank folder. Slowly, I typed a single word into the field evidence. My chest tightened as the letters appeared, but I pressed enter. This wasn't just a file. It was a step I had never taken before. The first document I saved was the ER report. Diagnosis dislocated. Left shoulder, split lip, bruising to the jaw, injuries consistent with physical assault. Beneath that, the physician's note injuries could not be self-inflicted. Next came the photographs. I had taken them that morning, my hand shaking as I raised the phone. The purple swelling beneath my eye, the bruises along my jaw, the angry red mark on my shoulder where my father's grip had held me down. Each image I labeled, carefully marking the date and time. Then I pulled up the messages. Every text Megan had sent, every missed call, every group thread where she hinted that I was unstable. All of it went into the folder. I saved the Facebook video too, even though my stomach churned at the sight of it. Proof, I reminded myself. This was proof. Hours passed before Karen arrived with something that made my hands go cold. She set her phone on the table and tapped the screen. A grainy black and white video filled at the view from Mrs. Whitfield's security camera across the street. It showed the garage door, my father storming out, Megan following just behind him. Neither of them looked back. Then moments later, I appeared crawling into the frame, dragging my arm, uselessly blood clear even in the poor resolution. Karen didn't say anything as she let it play. The footage ended with me disappearing toward the porch, struggling just to reach the door. She finally met my eyes. "This is enough to start." The words lingered between us. My fingers hovered above the keyboard. Start what I asked, though. I already knew. Holding them accountable. I thought of my mother's voice on the other side of the door, choosing silence. I thought of my father's fists. I thought of Megan's smirk as she told me I was being dramatic. The truth cut sharper than any blow. The family I had spent years protecting no longer existed, not for me. By midnight, the folder was full: medical reports, photographs, messages, the Facebook video, and now the security footage. I backed it up to a flash drive and slid it into my desk drawer. For the first time in years, I wasn't cleaning up a mess they had made. I was preparing to stand against it. When I finally closed the laptop, the house around me was silent. No ringing phone, no voices echoing down the hall. Just the stillness of knowing the next move was mine. The thought left me trembling, but beneath the fear was something steadier, a strength I had never allowed myself to claim. The folder on my laptop grew heavier with each file I added, like proof had its own kind of weight. Every document, every photo, every message told the truth in a way words never could. But I knew paper alone wouldn't silence Megan. She had already moved faster shaping the story before I had even left the hospital. By the next morning, her post had spread. Friends of hers shared prayers, aunts and cousins whispered their concern, and neighbors left sympathetic comments. Each one painted me as unstable, a fragile woman who had broken down in my parents' garage. My phone buzzed constantly, but none of the messages were asking if I was all right. They were questions about whether I was getting the help I needed. I stared at the screen, feeling each vibration echo through me. Megan hadn't just turned her back, she had turned the spotlight on me. And people were watching. Karen came over that evening with takeout, her presence steady where mine wasn't. She laid the cartons on the table, but didn't open them right away. "They're not stopping," she said, scrolling through her own phone. "Megan's making sure this spreads to anyone who might listen." I rubbed the bandage across my lip, silent for a moment. What do I do if I say anything it makes me look worse? If I stay quiet, she wins. "You don't argue with them," Karen replied firmly. "You build your case. You've already started. Now you keep going." Her certainty gave me something solid to hold on to. I opened the folder again and pulled the flash drive from the drawer, sliding it across the table toward her. "This has everything so far. If something happens to me, I need you to have it too." Karen's eyes softened, but she didn't argue. She slipped it into her bag without hesitation. That night I sat at the table long after she left, the glow of the laptop screen casting the kitchen in pale light. I clicked through the photos again, forcing myself to look at the bruises, the swelling, the injuries that could never be mistaken for an episode. I added one more note in the folder, a copy of the doctor's statement highlighting the line that read, "Injuries not consistent with self-harm." The more I gathered, the clearer it became. They wanted the world to see me as weak, unstable, incapable. What I held was proof of the opposite. But even as I strengthened my file, Megan didn't stop. By the weekend, she had shifted from sympathy posts to quiet suggestions that I was lashing out. Screenshots sent to me by distant cousins showed her implying I was angry, unpredictable, even dangerous. The lies were careful, but they spread fast. I sat across from Karen again, my fingers clenched around a cup of coffee that had gone cold. "She's making sure everyone believes her before I even open my mouth." "Then it's time," Karen said simply. "You can't wait for them to destroy your name completely. You take this to the police. You press charges." The thought made my chest tighten, but I nodded. The flash drive was ready, the documents prepared. I picked it up, turning it over in my hand, and slipped it into my coat pocket. When I stepped outside, the night air was sharp, cutting against my cheeks. I walked to the car, with deliberate steps, each one slower than the last, until I stood beside the driver's door. My breath clouded in front of me, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was carrying their secret anymore. The next morning, I sat in the waiting room of the police station. The walls were painted a dull beige, the air thick with the smell of old paper and coffee. A young officer called my name, leading me into a small office with 2 chairs and a desk stacked high with files. His badge read Officer Ramirez. He listened as I explained, his pen moving steadily across the notepad. I slid the flash drive across the desk, my hand shaking only slightly. "Everything is here. Medical records, photographs, messages, and video. It proves what happened." He nodded, plugging it into the computer. One by one, the files opened on the screen. The photographs made him pause, his brow tightening. When the security footage played, showing me dragging myself from the garage, his pen stopped completely. He leaned back silent for a long moment, then said quietly, "This isn't just family trouble. This is a crime." Hearing it spoken aloud carried a weight I hadn't expected. I sat straighter, my shoulders easing just a little. He explained the process, outlining next steps, asking questions about dates and times. I answered each one carefully, my voice steadier with each word. When I left the station, the winter sun was pale overhead, but the air felt different, lighter. That evening, I returned home to find Megan's number lighting up my phone again, messages piling one after another. I didn't open them. For the first time, I didn't feel compelled to respond. Instead, I closed the phone, set it aside, and let the quiet of my apartment fill the room. The folder on my desk no longer felt like a burden, it felt like armor. I knew the hardest part still lay ahead. A courtroom, facing them again, speaking aloud the truth they had tried so hard to bury. But I also knew this time I wasn't crawling alone. The first time I saw the courtroom, it didn't feel real. The walls were lined with polished wood, the air faintly carrying the smell of paper and stale coffee. I sat at the plaintiff's table with my attorney, a woman named Sarah Bennett, who spoke in steady tones that anchored me. Across the aisle, my father sat in a pressed suit, his jaw locked tight. Megan was beside him, scrolling her phone as if she had somewhere else to be. My mother had taken a seat in the back row, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on the floor. When the judge entered the room, rows together. I stood, my knees trembling, then sank back into the chair. Sarah began by laying out the evidence. She held up the flash drive I had given her, the same one I had stared at for nights before. "Your Honor," she said clearly, "this contains medical records, security footage, and social media posts from the defendants. All are relevant to the charges at hand." The judge gave a brief nod. The screen lit up with the first piece of evidence, the video from Mrs. Whitfield's camera. There was no sound, just the grainy black and white image of my father storming out of the garage, Megan following behind him. Moments later, the footage showed me dragging myself into view, my arm, limp blood on my face as I struggled across the yard. The stillness of the courtroom broke with a collective murmur. Next came the hospital report. Sarah read aloud the diagnosis: dislocated left shoulder blunt force trauma, split lip injuries, not consistent with self-inflicted harm. The words echoed through the quiet room, each one sinking into the silence. She followed with photographs, my face swollen and bruised, my shoulder bandaged, the purple marks blooming across my skin. Then came Megan's Facebook post, projected large for everyone to see. The caption, written in her careful script, told of a sister who had suffered an episode. The contrast was undeniable. On one screen, the image of me crawling for help. On the next, Megan's claim that I was unstable, dangerous to myself. I felt my throat tighten, but I stayed still, my eyes on the screen. When it was my turn to speak, I rose slowly, steadying myself against the table. My voice carried farther than I expected. "I didn't want to be here," I began. "I didn't want to stand in front of strangers and describe what my father did to me." But when your family closes the door on you, literally, you realize you have two choices: keep bleeding for them or stop. My father's glare burned into me from across the room, but I didn't look away. Megan shifted in her seat, her jaw tightening, but her phone was finally set aside. My mother never raised her eyes. Sarah guided me through questions, each one simple, each one giving me space to tell what happened. I spoke of the garage, the shove against the wall, the crack of my father's fist, Megan's quiet words as I bled on the floor. I spoke of the locked door, the silence on the other side, the mat that read, "Family First," beneath me as I collapsed. My voice wavered at times, but I finished every answer. The defense tried to counter. My father's attorney suggested I had exaggerated, that the altercation had been a misunderstanding. But the evidence sat plain between us, the medical records, the photographs, the footage. Sarah pressed forward, her voice calm but unyielding. "The facts are not in dispute," she said. "The question is whether this court will allow them to be ignored." The judge sat in silence for a long moment. After the arguments ended, his hands folded before him. Then he began his ruling. My father was guilty of assault. Megan was guilty of defamation. A restraining order was granted, barring both from contact. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The sound of the gavel striking wood echoed through the room, final and unshakable. When it was over, I stepped outside into the winter air. The sky was pale, the sun weak but bright enough to sting my eyes. My father didn't look back as he left with his attorney. Megan walked quickly, her heels striking against the tile, her phone back in her hand. My mother lingered only long enough to glance at me once before following them out the door. On the courthouse steps, Karen waited, holding a paper cup of coffee that steamed in the cold. She smiled when she saw me. "You did it." I let out a breath, my shoulders lighter than they had been in years. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I did." The wind picked up, carrying with it the sound of traffic and the faint toll of a church bell in the distance. For the first time, I felt like I was standing on my own ground, steady and unshaken. I knew there was still more to face: the silence from my mother, the anger from Megan, the years of distance that could never be undone. But as I took the cup from Karen's hands, warmth spreading through my fingers, I understood that something had shifted. The trial was over, but my life wasn't finished with them yet. What came next would not be about their power over me. It would be about what I chose to carry forward. The courthouse doors shut behind me, and the winter air felt sharper than it had when I first walked in that morning. My breath curled in front of me, each exhale carrying away the weight of the ruling I had just heard. Robert had been found guilty of assault, Megan guilty of defamation, and the judge's restraining order meant neither of them could reach me again. The sound of the gavel still echoed in my mind, final and steady, as though it had severed something I had carried my entire life. Karen walked beside me down the stone steps, her hand brushing my arm as though reminding me I wasn't alone. She held a paper cup out to me, steam rising in the cold. "You stood up there, Claire. You didn't let them take your voice." I nodded, wrapping my hands around the warmth. The sky above was pale-streaked with thin clouds, and for the first time in months, the air felt breathable. That evening, my apartment was quiet when I returned, the silence no longer heavy, but restful. I placed the court documents on the counter and sat at the table, letting the stillness surround me. The phone lit up again with messages, but not from Megan this time. Distant relatives, some asking what had really happened, others apologizing for believing her words. I read them slowly, one after another, before setting the phone down. Their voices no longer held the same weight. Days passed, and the rhythm of my life began to return. I went back to work, the office full of the usual hum of phones and tapping keyboards. My colleagues asked careful questions about my absence, but I kept my answers brief. The details belonged in the courtroom, not in office chatter. What mattered was that I was there, steady in my chair, my work spread neatly before me. At night, I sometimes woke from the memory of that garage, the slam of the wall, the crack across my face, Megan's whisper cutting through it all. But the fear no longer held me the way it once had. Each time I rose, made tea, and sat by the window, reminding myself of the papers on the counter and the judgment recorded in black and white. Karen visited often, sometimes bringing groceries, other times just a warm smile and conversation that steered clear of the past. She had become more than a friend. She was the person who had believed me when even my own mother had turned away. One evening, as we sat watching the snow fall outside, she looked over and said softly, "You know, family doesn't always come from blood. Sometimes it's the people who show up when no one else does." Her words lingered, and I realized how true they were. The Donovans had closed their door on me, but Karen had opened hers without hesitation. And that, I thought, was the kind of family worth keeping. The restraining order gave me peace I hadn't known was possible. No more late-night calls demanding explanations. No more posts twisting the truth. Megan's accounts grew quiet, and my father's silence was louder than his words had ever been. My mother never reached out, and though her absence stung, it no longer defined me. One afternoon I walked past Mrs. Whitfield's house. She waved me over, her kind eyes soft, as she asked how I was healing. "You were braver than anyone should have to be," she said, her voice trembling slightly. I thanked her, grateful for the neighbor who had opened her door when my own parents hadn't. In those small moments, Karen's laughter in my kitchen, Mrs. Whitfield's steady kindness, even the quiet strength I felt at my desk, I found pieces of something new. Not the fractured version of family I had grown up with, but a foundation built on truth, not obligation. The trial had given me justice, but it was these moments that gave me life back. And as the snow began to melt, giving way to the pale light of early spring, I realized I was no longer waiting for their approval. I was no longer carrying their weight. I knew the story wasn't finished, that closure rarely comes all at once, but I also knew the path forward belonged to me now. And as I stood at my window watching the world thaw, I felt ready for the next step, one I would take without fear. The weeks after the trial felt strangely quiet, as if the noise that had filled my life for so long had finally gone still. My apartment became a place of rest instead of retreat, and for the first time I didn't brace myself whenever the phone buzzed. Robert and Megan had faded into silence, and with the restraining order in place, their reach no longer touched me. My mother never called, and though her absence stung, it was no longer a wound I carried every day. Karen stayed close, her laughter filling my kitchen on nights when we cooked together, her steady presence, a reminder that love could exist without conditions. Mrs. Whitfield waved from her porch when I passed her house, her kindness undiminished, and her simple words of concern stayed with me longer than she probably knew. These women had shown me something my own blood never had, that care is proven in action, not claimed in name. At work, life resumed its rhythm. I slipped back into the routine of numbers and meetings, the hum of the office grounding me in a way that felt steady and safe. Colleagues asked gentle questions, but I gave few answers because the truth of what happened belonged to me now. I no longer needed to explain or justify. The court had spoken, and so had I. Nights were still harder. There were moments when I woke with the memory of that garage, the shove, the fist, the silence behind the locked door. But instead of fear, those memories carried a different weight now. They reminded me of how far I had crawled and of the strength I had found in getting back up. Standing by the window one evening, I watched the snow begin to fall again, soft and steady under the streetlight. It struck me that winter had been the season of both my breaking and my rebuilding. The cold had nearly ended me, but it had also given me the clarity to start over. Family, I realized, isn't the house you're born into, or the bloodline you're told to protect. Family is the friend who shows up when the world calls you broken, the neighbor who opens her door when yours has been shut. It's the people who hold your truth when others try to bury it. I don't pretend the past never happened. The bruises have faded, but the memory will always remain. Yet those scars no longer define me. They remind me that I survived, that I chose not to keep bleeding for people who would never stop taking. And that choice has changed everything. So if you've ever carried a weight that wasn't yours to bear, I hope you remember this. You're allowed to set it down. You're allowed to choose peace over pain, truth over silence, and love over obligation. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched something in you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you know someone who needs to be reminded of their own strength, share this with them.